This is Leadership Beyond, your community of conversation.
But this is the first time in my professional career that everybody, 100% of us, are consciously aware we are engaged in the change initiative.
Yeah, everything. I mean, COVID caused us all to go through change, right? At the same time, but our experiences were so different.
Facing these unprecedented times in isolation is pure insanity. Joining us today is Lee Mozena. Lee is the owner and founder of Zena Consulting. Lee helps organizations develop, articulate, and reach DEI goals through training, facilitation, and strategic communication. Her strength-based process builds cultural competencies for leaders, managers, and business owners in any sector or industry where people want to work together better. Welcome, Lee Mozena.
Hi, Lee. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you.
So great to have you. So great to see you again.
Yeah. You too.
Why don't we get started? If you would just tell us a little bit about your background.
So I come from a community-oriented background, and that's where I started working with very diverse populations, and actually started in parent education and learned a lot about the different groups and communities in the Seattle area where I'm located. And I kept finding, I was doing train the trainer work as well, and I kept finding people in positions of power who did not understand the communities they were working with. And that seemed to me to put children and families at a huge disadvantage. So when I started my business in 2009, I really just moved those issues to a private sector format because I was in the situation where there were executives saying to me, hey, I need to know about some different cultural group they were working with, and they didn't know who to ask, and they were embarrassed to ask. And so I was able to provide answers. And, I do all kinds of things for companies, but basically strategic communication. So they're looking at the big picture, and also training and training design, and then facilitation. But I'd say one of the key things I do is ask the questions in the room that aren't being asked about who should be at this table to come up with a solution that's going to meet the needs of the most people.
Wow. It sounds like every CEO's office needs you in the room to ask those difficult questions.
Well, some do, some don't. I mean, I must say, I think people don't know about this, so I'm going to talk about it. The B Corp model is corporations, but now it's actually adapted to small businesses, and those are CEOs who regularly have to meet a triple bottom line of making sure their work and their organization is good for the people, and it's good for profit, and it's good for the environment. So there's a model out there for organizations to, even if you don't want to join the global B Corp movement, there are very rigorous models out there. But you are right to start with the CEO at the top of the organization, at the top, but also at the center, because a change, as you know, has to, if it's sustainable and if it's meaningful, has to come from the inside out or from the top down. And the thing about the field I'm in now, and I call myself a DEI consultant, these are functions that typically 20, 30 years ago was something that HR did. And now these are so central, these issues are so central to an organization's brand and to the marketplace, and maybe even to legal mandates, that it's not, these aren't issues that you can just pass off to an office down the hall. It's also learning about DEI and incorporating principles into your organization is increasingly a hallmark of leadership and a very important one. So it's not surprising that someone who is a CEO has made their way up to the top without these skills, because these are different skills and they're not necessary to becoming a CEO. So my job is to help people first start with themselves, and then they can come up with DEI solutions that feel natural to them and relate to the marketplace, and then to amplify that on an organizational level. So they're role modeling, but they're also leading the charge.
Yeah. Let's dig into that a little bit. We've heard you say DEI is for everyone. So if we take the last 2 years and we think about the experiences that have shaken our normal every day, right? What is normal anymore? Normal 2 years ago is not normal today. When we talk about COVID, of course, and the social injustice events that have happened over the course of the last 2 years, from your lens with D&I, talk a little bit about what are the emotions that are facing employees today. What are they, showing up to work and having to face that is maybe more extreme today than it was in the past, or more prominent, more on the table and in the forefront than it was in the past?
Right. So I don't know that the kinds of violent racist actions we've seen are more extreme, and they're going on as we speak, unfortunately. So I think one of the big differences now is that there is more media awareness in mainstream media. This has always been very well known in communities of color that these kinds of persistent injustices take place all the time. So when people say to me, oh, there's this new thing, social injustice, no, it's a very old thing, but you may be aware of it now. So that, again, I talk about self-awareness first, as if you just got a memo is a sign that you are someone who had the luxury of not having to even get a memo before. But people are showing up with higher expectations about their organization. I think we can all agree that we have a lot more awareness about organizational brand. So your DEI initiative is part of that brand, and younger people in particular across all socioeconomic and political stratas are not interested in hearing a bunch of excuses why you don't have to do much about DEI in your organization. They want to be aligned with leaders who are interested and intentionally involved in creating what they see as a better world. That's one part. The other part is the marketplace reality, and this does tie to COVID. People have learned that there's a new way, for better or worse, for organizations to function. A lot of people are not going back to the office in a regular way. Some aren't going back at all. So this coupled with the fact that there's a real demand in the marketplace, it is an employee's windfall for the first time in a long time, perhaps. So the bar is higher. And if I have a choice of joining an organization that aligns with my values, that's going to be higher priority for me, even if I don't get paid as much. I want to feel good about the people I'm working with, the organization, the leadership, and the work that I'm doing. And that's something I think that is only going to get more common with younger people. And, again, so the marketplace reality is very different as we become increasingly every year a more multicultural USA. And I don't just mean ethnic or race culture. We have more generations at work. We have more people with different kinds of neurological differences. We have obviously women and men and LGBTQ. So there are a lot of different factors in the workplace. It's a lot, frankly, for your basic executive who is a specialist in something entirely different, to have to be feeling that pressure that they have to have, not only just have answers for themselves to lead their organization. That's a lot.
Well, let's talk about the opportunity. And I think your background in marketing communication helps here, because one of the things that happened, and often well-meaning, so we're not talking about those that were just checking a box, because of the pressures of the George Floyd, and as you said, they weren't new problems, but that put new pressure. There was a lot of reactive spending. We've got to do something about this, and not catching our breath to think about how to do something sustainable. Doing something is better than doing nothing, but I know many very good trainers that are realizing the chance of this taking root in the organization right now are slim, and not because there's insidiousness, but it's just because it's a deeper problem that takes more work. So that's a long-winded way to get to my question to you, which I think is one of your strong points, is once you have the value aligned that we do want a truly diverse workplace, and that we do want people from different, all of those categories you mentioned, to find their place and to have inclusion, their voice in the mix, not just that we hire them. So how do you use communication as an aligner before you get to a classroom training solution?
Well, I want to look at what is the strategy. So I often think about that saying, if we build it, they'll come. Well, maybe some people will come. Other
if you
people,
make it mandatory.
you can make it mandatory and get a lot of hostages in your classroom or in your organization. But I like to think about, instead of that, what if we are in this space first and then people are attracted to us? Now that's proactive, and that's going to take more work, but it's going to be more organic, and your initiatives are going to be baked in. Again, this is somewhat often an HR topic and task, but HR has to work very closely with leadership at all levels so that they see change and whatever this is for your organization, and that can look different for every organization. They see it as something that's an initiative we're all going for, and even that is not realistic. I mean, there are going to be people who are not interested at all, so they are going to feel like they've been taken hostage no matter what. That's okay. Those people are always going to be there. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. And I think that, as obvious as that might seem to you, it's often missing. And I see it as an opportunity. We've talked to some guests about reinventing HR, and many HR professionals have been complaining that they don't really feel like their voice is in the leadership mix. And I think the DEI provides the best opportunity we've seen, not without its challenges, not easily, and definitely needing help, to say that we can't have departmental DEI. We can't just, we're either in or not in. And if we're in, it isn't an event, it's a process. And so you did answer it. It really is. And I think you used the term branding DEI. And so if a brand isn't real, then people will sniff it out. You could hire a great consulting company and they could give you a great DEI brand. But if it's not lived into, that's not going to fool the folks that are either there or the ones that are thinking of joining the company. So this is a real opportunity for pulling all that together.
Right. And I don't have any problem with people checking boxes, honestly, because it is a start. And in that process, they're going to learn. And it's kind of tricky, though, because you can check the boxes, and that's a very public procedure. And then your employees are going to hold you accountable for those boxes.
You
So
were
I
just
think it's
missing one word, if I may interrupt you there.
sure.
Intentionally, I interrupted you. I have no trouble with checking boxes. I have trouble with the word that comes before it, just checking boxes.
Okay.
Sometimes you have to do something to get started.
Right.
And even if that something is wrong, it gets the conversation going, which you just said very well. But if that's just checking the box, and I'm looking at Adrienne, she's seen that we did that change thing, or we did that reorg. There's this project mentality. And if DEI is just a project, then it is going to, might do some good. Any individual might have a whole change of perspective, but it's not going to change the organization. And so I think
Okay.
it's an ongoing communication issue, which falls into your strength.
It is. Thank you. And for me, one of the biggest elephants in the room is we're talking about this. Well, what does this mean? Are we talking about racism or social injustice? Or are we talking about making people, making an organizational culture where everyone feels that they can show up as themselves and work together well on teams? And it's very easy to get caught up in what's going on in our culture and our society and the news that is, often very upsetting. And we don't necessarily, particularly as a white person, using these labels is something I've had to get used to. But I want people to be able to talk very specifically about what does DEI mean in our organization? What does it mean in this marketplace? What does it mean to me as an employee? Because if you just say, this social justice, that's not something you can solve as an organization even. So I think getting people talking very specifically, for instance, I did some work with a county near me in Seattle, and they happen to have a 75% white population. Well, the challenge for them is this looks bad, but actually, why would we make that assumption? The fact is they have increased their diversity of people by about 10% in the past 10 years, maybe less, but there just aren't a lot of people of color there. Does that mean that they are doing something wrong? Does that mean they shouldn't be part of a DEI conversation? No. Instead, I helped them look at, let's look at the work that you're doing with Indigenous populations. Now, that's a very tiny minority. It's very important work. It's very difficult work because, for good reasons, trust is low between Native American groups and non-Native institutions, such as government. That's no secret. And they also have more South Asian people moving there, which is very common in the Seattle area. And they have a lot more Muslim Americans and Arab Americans moving there. Why? Because the Northwest is known to be a place that is pretty open to different cultures. So instead of fretting and saying, oh, we're not doing enough, we're saying, there's nothing we can do. We have no control over who moves to our area. Let's take a look at what you're doing well and build on that, because the message gets out in all kinds of ways, whether you are, a county or an organization or a business that is trying to be inclusive, or whether you're not interested in that.
So it's about telling the truth about the current situation, and then being clear on what we value. And we don't value some term called DEI that can be very elusive, but we value a certain thing about people and work and the kind of culture we want to have. And then you can start to invite people into the conversation once you define what it is we're looking for. And then that changes over time, but it doesn't get, and I won't get into the subject now. And so then if I'm not going to get into it, I should just shut up, Tom.
Well, let me step in here. I like to say, diversity is a noun and inclusion is a verb, and communication is the process that makes that happen. And when people start talking about equity, and equality. That to me is a social justice part of the equation that I don't know that it is. I don't know how relevant it is, for instance, to a small business. Let's look at it this way. From a bottom line point of view, you hired this employee, and if they do not feel included in the team's work for whatever reason, if it's an important reason, then why wouldn't you want to have a culture that helps solve that problem? Because I don't think the problem is people aren't talking to each other. It's that they're not working as well together as they could for the bottom line, which we're all interested in. And so how can our skills as an organization, as leaders, help make that situation better? Because we make it a priority that we want people to work together well. It's good for everyone.
They're not talking to each other effectively in a way that produces collaborative results.
Exactly.
And I agree, totally agree.
And I think, again, I'm using very specific words because I don't hear people using them enough. When I hear people say, we have to do the right thing, I just say, but what is the right thing? Because for me, let's say the right thing is me making as much money as possible. And I don't care who I mow down in my path. I don't have any respect for anyone who isn't like me. I'm not going to say that, but that's how I feel. And I don't care about anybody but me. So the right thing is for me to ignore all your silly initiatives. But if you put me on a team and make me go through some DEI training and ask me to pretend that I think it's important, that's ridiculous. I'm just going to make trouble, and I'm not going to help you. And I'm going to try to undermine whatever you do. And that's going to affect your culture. So I think we have to recognize that some people are not interested in equity. Some people are not interested in equality. And those are difficult concepts anyway. A lot of people don't understand them. So I'm not saying let's ignore them, but if we're going to use those terms, can we be very specific about what we mean for this organization, for this leader? And I will give you another example because it's from a different sector and it might be kind of helpful. I'm working with state agencies, and a new trend in the state of Washington is to have RFPs require DEI and B, and that B stands for belonging. So I asked prime contractor, how do we measure belonging? Why is this a mandate that I have to feel as if I belong? I don't know what the answer is, but it is confusing. I think it's a wonderful, maybe it's a wonderful objective, but to me, it has a potential to add more confusion. We already have the letter E that means who knows what to everyone, different thing. And now we're adding belonging. That to me is a very primal, familial word. So I'm not sure what its place is in this state contract. And I thought it was interesting that the person said, well, yeah, the agency isn't really sure about that either.
It feels like it should belong, using the belong word on purpose. But how in the world do you measure it is right. And some people never feel they belong anywhere. I don't think I ever felt like I belonged.
Well, how do you measure it? And then again, the reason I use the public sector example is this is a mandate now. So it becomes very tricky. And it's just a way for me to say the words really matter, and we have to be very intentional about the words we use. And I would rather use fewer words and be very clear about the ones we're using. For instance, if I'm in a heartland city and everyone around me is white, I'm not going to use the word diversity as much. That's not a reality in my marketplace in the sense that most people think. But I'm also not going to be sitting around saying, or let's say, better example, maybe I'm in a rural area that is monocultural. I'm not going to sit around saying, oh, I can't go to business work today because there aren't enough diverse people there. If I'm on the internet, I'm interacting with people around the globe. So I think we just have to look at what's in front of us. Where can we start somewhere, and you'll probably get a lot of benefit from it first and foremost. And then you'll be surprised to learn that it also helps your organization.
Well, that's a great place to wrap this up, because your super strength is clarity of communication. And how do you mean that when you use a term? And you're really good. Every conversation I have with you, I've got a bunch of words there, and it gets clearer and clearer. And so what I would recommend people, if they are really wanting to make a long-term difference, start there. Because there's so many assumptions in each of those words, not as many in the D and the I as there is in the E, but there's all kinds of assumptions, and we need to validate the assumptions, clarify the assumptions, and then we can have action that's likely to produce a better culture that people want to work in.
How does a leader get started in terms of they feel like I should be doing more? There's a gut check and there's a feeling I should be doing more. How would a leader get started?
So I have a 5-step process, thank you. And it begins with self-knowledge that, like I said before, we want to lead change from the center. I think you would agree with that as a change management professional. So I have 5 communication steps to prevent, reduce, and resolve. Specifically, I designed this for re-entry conflict, which is something you and I were working on, but it can be used in any situation, such as trying to learn new skills and have new experiences in order to have a more inclusive environment and organization. And the first step is actually self-knowledge. So for me, that is some work around the kinds of privilege I have, the doors that I can open just with blue eyes and white skin. Happens all the time. It's something I take for granted. I don't even notice unless I make an effort. There's nothing wrong with it. I try to open doors that, crack them open that maybe others might be pushing behind me, and that's fine. But that self-knowledge of just where I'm coming from and what I'm bringing to the situation is really important, because then I can start to see what I have that other people don't, and vice versa. So I also want to look at empathy. That's another part of, we don't necessarily think about that in a business context, but it's a human trait. It's really an important one. And then maybe sympathy is something like, I can't relate to someone who's had a lot of difficulties getting to where they are in life. I come from a lot of advantages. So I want to kind of pay attention to that. The other thing is I want to be flexible. And I think one thing that COVID has showed us is we have to be more flexible than we ever imagined was possible as leaders, whether we like it or not. And I know that's really easy for a small business, and it's really a lot more difficult for a larger organization. Then we have to be ambiguous. We have to be comfortable with the ambiguity of not knowing how other people think, how they communicate. I can't be absolutely sure how you're going to react to what I do because I don't know you that well. And then the last one is to have curiosity. So like we say in our training, is it a difference that makes a difference? And if it's not a difference that makes a difference in terms of productivity or a legal obligation, then I'm just curious. You do things differently than me, and I can work around that. I'm not going to get stuck on it. And we can keep going.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that model.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Beyond podcast. We hope you benefited from this conversation as much as we have. We invite you to join our community of conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to sign up at aleadershipbeyond.com. for free materials and updates. That's aleadershipbeyond.com. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.